Now I'm going to use a very simple application to understand the basics of testing. So here is the output of the application, very simple application. When you load the application, it shows 0. This is just a counter, and on increment, it gets incremented by 1. As you can see, when I increment, it increments the value by 1. Now we will implement testing on this component first, and then we will improvise as we proceed further. Here is the code. It's a very simple counter component which has the state counter, and on click of the button I am incrementing the counter by 1. So you can easily understand this concept. And in the app.js I have the counter here, the counter component that gets displayed. So there is nothing much in the application as such, but there will be a lot to understand when we start the testing. Now let's try to create a test for this counter component. Usually the test file will have component name.test.js naming convention, and the same we will do here. So let me create counter.test.js. So let's first import React from React. Why do we need this here? Simple, it's because we are going to test the React component, so we will need it. We will also need to render the component virtually, that is, in the virtual DOM, the component is rendered. So I will also import the method render to render the component from the React testing library, and also the screen method to get access to virtual DOM. React testing library is already installed with CRA, that is the Create React App, which we have already seen in package.json. Still, let's check it again. Here you see the testing library installed. Let me also import the counter component as the test will run on it. So let's begin writing the test. Now the test function is used to write a test. This function has two arguments. First is the description of the test, that is describing the test, and second is an anonymous function which contains the code of testing. So let us define or describe a test. I'll say test. Now inside this I'm going to give the description that initially I expect that the value in the counter should be 0. So I'll say initial value of counter should be 0. And here I'm going to define the blank function. Now inside this function, the first thing is to render the component. Let me quickly show you the code which by default the app.test.js offers. So here I will say render, and this method takes the JSX, that is the component. So I will say counter. Now the same line you can write like this also. You can say const component is equal to render and then counter, and then later the component object gives you the access to screen, that is the virtual DOM. But we will just go ahead with this syntax only, and we will use the screen object to do so. So now let's say screen dot, and you can see all the find, get and query selector methods to get the access of elements of the rendered component. If you are using get methods, they will throw an error in case the element is not found, whereas the query selector won't do it, and find methods return promise, which we will see as we proceed further. I will say const counter element is equal to screen dot get by text zero. That means wherever there is a value with zero, the label, that reference I want in this counter element. Then I will write expect counter element. Here you can say various matchers. Right now we are going to use to be in the document. That's it. So now first test is return, where we say that render the counter component, get the reference of the element which is initially 0, and we expect that there has to be an element in the document which has value 0. So that means the element is present, the element is existing. Alright, now let me remove the app.test.js as we won't be writing any test in it. And let's just save and run the test. I'll say npm test. As you can see, it is showing the test pass and initial value of counter should be 0 is ticked correct. Let's change the value from 0 to 1 and see what it does. I'll go to counter.js and change the use state 0 to 1. Just save, and there you see the error. So this is the basic idea about testing. In TDD environment, the counter.js should be developed after the test is returned. So you'll have counter.test.js first and then you start developing counter.js. But here, because I have to show you few concepts, I'm not going to follow that. Certainly when you write a test, the first is always the red phase, that is the failed test. Then the developers refactor, that is make the respective corrections or provide the right values. And then the third phase comes in picture, that is the green phase, or you can say the past test. But that also I did not follow because we are learning the concept and it is the very initial stage for you to understand. So I am not following those things, but when you practically do it in the development environment, certainly you are going to take care of all such things. So this should give you a basic idea about testing. As we proceed, you will see various combinations and possibilities, including events and user interaction. Now let's talk about few relative questions. The first question is, explain the basic syntax of writing the test. So when you write the test, you just say test function. Here you give the first string, that is the description. You describe the test, and you have the second anonymous function in which you render the component or you write the assertions. That's how you define the test. So this is the basic syntax of writing test using the test function. The second question is, what do you mean by an assertion inside a test? Well, the assertion means when we write expect and then we have various assertions. For example, let me just say expect dot. Now if you see, there are various methods like to be called times, to be called to be. So you are comparing various situations here. You can say, for example, to be greater than. Let's say you have a numeric value and you just want to make sure that it is more than certain value. Say for example, you want that a variable should have value more than 20. So you'll say to be greater than. Here you may have, let's say, variable name x, and you say to be greater than the value, which value you want. So let's say more than 20, something like this. So the assertion basically allows you to define various possibilities in the test. So those are the validations you derive by writing the assertion, and that you do using the expect method, which further has many other methods to compare with different possibilities. The third question is, how will you render a component in a test? So well, you have the React testing library which you use, and render is the object, and you just use the component like we have done here, and that renders the component virtually for the test. The fourth question is, explain the screen object of the React testing library. So screen object is the object which allows you to deal with various elements of the DOM, that is the virtual DOM. And when I say dot, you see that there are various find, get, and even query selector methods which you can use to get the element in different manner, in different ways. Like you can get it by test ID, you can get it by text, you can get it by title. So you can get the reference of elements to check the values. So screen object actually gives you the access to the virtual DOM when the component is rendered inside a test.